Okay, good morning, everyone. I feel, what did Churchill say? I promise you sweat, tears, and I wish I could start this year by wishing anyone, by telling everyone that we're going to have a fun year. I'm not sure we are. We are going to move on at some stage because I recognise that this is not everyone's cup of tea. I just know way of simplifying what turns out to be very complicated maths of the sugya. I actually, in my own notes, just put together, there's 7 different Gemaras really that deal with the diukim of the numbers and the interplay between Avos and Toldot, and just to crunch the maths of what each piece is telling us, what the insight of each piece is telling us is not simple at all. I'm happy just to summarize the 7, or maybe someone can volunteer to put together a table or a chart of each of the Gemaras. Very briefly, we have the Elu at the end of in our sugya, in the end of our Mishnah, which the Gemara on Ayin Hey on the base is Medayik, which comes to exclude Rabbi Lezer, who says Toldot Makamav. Then we have the Minyan to Sefer, which comes to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, who adds in 2 more Melachos. Then we have the Minyan of the Reisha, which Tosfos Divrei Choser, the second Tosfos on Asagir, speaks about. And he says it doesn't list these 2 Melachos. You could have thought it doesn't list these 2 Melachos because the Einam of Vereres Kol Kach, they're not so clear. I'm not so clear what Tosfos means by that answer. So what if they're not so clear? But Tosfos says that's why they're not listed. Then we have the phrase of Ha'osa Melachos Ha B'me'ein Melacha Achas, which seems to say that you're not chayav for an Av and a Toldot together, and that question is addressed by Tosfos and by the Ramban that I printed in the source in the handout sheets. The Ramban also addressed that question. Then we have the Minyan Dereisha. Sorry, I already discussed the Minyan Dereisha, but just another aspect in the Minyan Dereisha is that Rabbi Yochanan seems to derive to the Minyan Dereisha Shemason Kulam Behalamachas. And we had the question of how that differs from what the Mishnah says, which is Chayv Kol Melacha, Av Melacha or Melacha. When you have someone who's Shogeg of Melachas Habi or Chayv Kol Melacha or Melacha, what's Rabbi Yochanan adding to that? And we saw that the answer is in Rashi that this is talking about a case where you Shecheach Kol Hilchas Shabbos, you've forgotten all the halachas of Shabbos, and that's the case Rabbi Yochanan is talking about. Then you have the question of why the Minyan of the Reisha doesn't exclude Rabbi Lezer of a Toldot Makamav. If the Mishnah says you're chayiv in 39 melachos, why doesn't that include a Toldot? Why doesn't that exclude a Toldot Makamav? Remarkably, that question is not asked by Tosfos. Tosfos, again, let me just make this clear. At the beginning of the Mishnah, it says there's 39 melachos. So Tosfos asks, that comes to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, who says 2 more melachos. Tosfos doesn't ask that why doesn't that alone tell us that you only chayiv 39 if you break all Hilchos Shabbos? In others, you're not chayiv for Toldot b'makamav. Tosfos never asks that question. That question is asked by the Maram and the Ritva. I printed the Ritva at the beginning of the handout sheets, and I printed the Maram. I think I sent it later as an additional Maramakum. And then finally, we have a question of the language of the Mishnah, which said the earlier Mishnah, which says chayiv al kol melacha or melacha, or in some girsos chayiv al kol av melacha or melacha, which the Ramban asks should already teach me that you're not chayiv in a Toldot because it only says chayiv al kol av melacha or melacha. So those are the 7 sources that we have, and then there's really an 8th, which Maram references, and I don't really want to go into in too great detail, in which the Gemara asks on Rebbe, because Rebbe is dorish from the Psukim that the number 39, that there's 39 melachos, and the Gemara says if it's important for the Torah to tell us there's 39 melachos, that can only be because it's important to categorize which melachos fall under the category of which Toldos fall under the category of which Av, which can only be relevant if you're not chayav for a Toldah b'makam Av, and therefore it's impossible. If you learn that the number 39 comes from a drasha in the Torah, it must be the number 39 is significant, and you're not chayav in a Toldah b'makam Av. So that's a Gemara that already says this. So I believe later I will try and put in the WhatsApp group a list of these 8 Gemaras just to give people a sort of parity of a clarity of the non-clarity that we are facing. So that's the summary of really the whole discussion range arranged in the sugya.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
I know it's very early. Can I just ask for one thing? You said it just now, and you also said it last week on Rabbi Zobin. When he said no normally Shem was something home up to cover black. And so Rashi explains that, and you're saying that this is to tell you that the finish of this is that if he doesn't know any of them, he's still high.
Yes.
So there are actually three Rashis on this. There's a Rashi on the bottom of base, there's a Rashi in the Mishnah itself, and there's a Rashi on our Hamad.
Yes.
And the other two Rashis say pretty clearly, it's telling you not that if he forgets them, the finish isn't that if he forgets them all, is high, but the finish is high at 39.
Yes.
And there's a Gemara somewhere in the middle, shortly after the first Mishnah, which kind of, I think, also implies the finish is not that if he forgets them all.
Yes.
Gemara has that more.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a paraphrase of what I called Usher's question really last week. At the time, last year I tentatively suggested that we shouldn't be medayik from off sugya sources that say this is what it says, because now that we have the extra diuk, because in truth, it is correct to say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Lezer, and it is correct to say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The ironclad proof for that is the Sefer, as the Gemara says in Ayin Home and Base. But now that we have the Sefer, the correct reading of the ratio is also, when the ratio says this is the number, it means because it doesn't hold like Rabbi Lezer and doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. So I suggested that the Gemara as a shortcut is using a phraseology, or Rashi as a shortcut is using a phraseology, because this is the correct. What is the glut way to read this phrase in the Mishnah? Once we see the Sefer of the Mishnah, where the precise language teaches us it's not like Rabbi Lezer, it's also to say that when the Mishnah says 39 in the beginning, it means to exclude Toldot. Even if, had I only had the number at the beginning, I could have kvetched and said it means that you are also chayiv on Toldot. But once I get to the end, the simplest reading is all of that. So I said this tentatively last year. In my spur of the moment comments on these things, what I really just now said is an explicit Ramban and Ritva. So if you look in the sources, the Ramban and the Ritva both say this, and their words are, just have a look at the Ramban in source 1 for those who have it. So if you look in the Ramban, let me explain the Ramban and the Ritva outside and then I'll read it inside just for the sake of simplicity. The Ramban and the Ritva give two answers to this question. Their first answer to the question is a phrase called somich aseifa. It's relying on the end. Meaning to say, even though the Gemara quotes a reisha of the Mishnah saying this, it's only provable from the Sefer of the Mishnah, but once we have the Sefer, that's the simplest reading of the reisha also. That's one way of saying it. Then the Ramban gives a second answer, the other way around, which is, in truth, a careful reader could have derived it from the reisha, but since it's not entirely clear-cut, it's legitimate for the Mishnah to reiterate the point at the end and make it absolutely explicit. And when the Gemara at the end says this is Lafuki Rabbi Lezer or Lafuki Rabbi Yehuda, to exclude Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have got it even without that from the reisha. It just means this is what this turn of phrase is there for in order to make it absolutely clear. This is how the Ramban deals with it, as does the Ritva. Both of these, in essence, mean that you can't rely on Gemara's off sugya. When Gemara quotes a phrase in the Mishnah to mean something, it could be the Gemara means that's what emerges from the Mishnah when read as a whole, and now this is the simplest reading of the Mishnah. And both the Ramban and the Ritva say, there's many other examples in the Gemara where you see such phenomena, where this is how where this is how the Gemara operates. So let's just read this inside, just for the sake of confusion. So the Ramban is source 1 on page 1. There's the first paragraph of the Ramban is the largest paragraph. If you look at the fourth last line, it begins with the word Ve'esha. So after the Ramban has crunched some of these Gemaras, he also brings a Gemara in Krisus, by the way, which also misquotes what's right. He says Ve'esha to Somech HaSefer. It could be that when we make these diukim, when the Gemara off topic cites something, it's Somech HaSefer. It relies on the Sefer. To give it a safer asya to look Rabbi Elazar, since the ends of the Gemara is going not like Rabbi Elazar, since the ends of the mission is clearly not like Rabbi Elazar, we don't force ourselves to squeeze in the Reisha like Rabbi Elazar. We read it, we establish it in the simplest form, which is like the Rabbanon. So we only have the Reisha of the Mishnah. What the Ramban is saying is, let's be honest, if the Mishnah says there's 39 Melachos and you're chayav 39, the simplest explanation is you're chayav 39 and you're not chayav Toldot and Makom Av. You could have catched and said, no, it means if you do just 39 others, you're only chayav 39. But if you then did another 10 Toldos, you'll also be chayav Nishon 10. That's a bit of a force, but it's possible. In the Reisha we see, in the Sefer we see that the Mishnah is not Rabbi Elazar. Now that in the Sefer we see the Mishnah is not Rabbi Elazar, so you can go back in the Reisha and read it like a normal person and don't squeeze yourselves into diyokim. That's the Ramban's first answer. The second answer, he says, is Yesh Loma. This is now the second answer. The Afal Gav de Mireisha Shemas Minei, the fucking Rabbi Elazar. Even though from the Reisha you could hear to exclude Rabbi Elazar, Sosim Nami Bach Mishnah written. Nonetheless, the Mishnah is so same, it seals it off, it makes it absolutely clear in the second Mishnah, the Lokivasa against Rabbi Elazar. So given the Itzrach in the Tana and the Mishnah fucking Rabbi Yehuda, since the Tana anyway had to add in a final clause, a closing clause to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, Tana Eila Agav Ocha, it also added in a final clause to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, incidentally, also to make it a clear against Rabbi Elazar, and there's many examples of this in the Talmud. In other words, even though we expect Mishnayos to be written with sparsity of language, we expect Mishnayos to be written with care of language to try and convey maximum pieces of information per word. Nonetheless, it's legitimate for the Mishnah to sometimes add in something to make something crystal clear and to avoid misunderstanding, particularly when it anyway needs to add that closing clause for some other reason. This is what the Ramban said. The Ritva says the same thing in the seventh last line in the Ritva. The last word of the line is Perish. He says Perish lePerishon. This is a very beautiful Ritva because this is a Ritva who's explaining a Tosfos. So we have a later Rishon as a commentator on an earlier Rishon. Perish lePerishon, the explanation of their explanations. He's saying this in Tosfos. The Hayida Krisus, that Gemara in Krisus. Again, don't worry about the Gemara in Krisus. All we're bringing from the Gemara in Krisus is a Gemara that seems to bring from the Reisha of the Mishnah that you're not chayav on the Toldot Makom Av. Now, Sefer Tohocha Samich, it's relying on the Sefer of here. To Ktoni Edu Lafukin Rabbi Elazar. For love to Nafkalomer Yimamish. Not that doesn't mean that he learns it from there literally. The Hachi Uchad the Talmud, and this is the Talmud. And then he says Rabbeinu Zal Pirish, and then he quotes the Ramban. Rabbeinu is the teacher of the Ritva, the Ramban. Who he quotes over here. So this is the styling. What this means to say, by the way, just in terms of general derech halimud, is that you always have to know what is the commanding sugya on a topic. What is the main sugya of a topic where the Gemara is addressing something, and there you can express the Gemara to be. You can expect the Gemara to be precise about exactly which phrase teaches us something. And in other sugyas, the Gemara may just quote a Mishnah, the opening words of a Mishnah, and say this is the simplest reading of the Mishnah, even though it recognizes if you really crunch the data, the actual clue is from the ends. Nonetheless, the Gemara will quote the Reisha. So this is just important in sort of derech halimud, where we're familiar with the Gemara, because Gemara is a collation of discussions that took place in the Beis Medrash. Discussions will often go off topic or mention other Gemaras, and you need to know what is what they call the commanding sugya, the sovereign sugya, the main sugya that deals with it. So krisus, the topic of krisus is chayav koris. Any lav which is chayav koris, you also chayav a chatos if you do it with Shogeg. And then for Masechet krisus is the Masechet that talks about Shogeg, the halachas of Shogeg. Masechet Shabbos is the Masechet that talks about Shabbos. Our Perek of Shabbos, the first half of Perek Klal Gadol, talks about Shogeg in Shabbos from the perspective of Hilchos Shabbos. The Gemara in Krisus talks about Shogeg on Shabbos from the perspective of a sugya around Shogeg. In each case, you have to know what is the main sugya. The main sugya in Hilchos Shabbos is Masechet Shabbos. The main sugya in Hilchos Shogeg is Masechet Krisus. And you have to know which one would you? How do you put these two sugyas together? That's what's going on in the Ramban. I have to tell you, I even though we're dipping into this topic of Sveikas, when we started learning Shabbos, I made a decision not to start from the beginning of Perek Klal Gadol because Krisus Shogeg is a famously fraught subject, and it's enormously complicated. If there's interest, I'm happy to learn Bekiyastik, the first two daf of Klal Gadol, because it's very, very interesting to know what shogos are and the whole discussion about what mistakes are and how humans make mistakes. It's a very profound Gemara. Maybe we'll take a straw poll when we finish this Gemara. I do not want to give Shiur on it because it will end up as every Shiur will be like this, enormously technical and chashbon, and the chaburah will gradually whittle away. If people are interested, I don't mind dedicating a couple of shiurim and days just on learning the sugya so I'll take opinions afterwards. And Agav, one on the subject, when we finish the Mishnah main decision, we're going to learn some muktzah. We'll do muktzah together, a little bit of muktzah together as our next topic. But I'm happy to do Shogeg as like a diversion for a few days, but not more than that. Okay, so
if we're now using the minyan of Melachot to limit the number of chataot to 39, how do we deal when we learned the Avot? We learned that at least there were opinions that if you did a Koav and then a Toldot of the Av, unless you did the Av to link the two together, you could be chayav two in the same category of Av. And that would then leave you potentially with more than 39 chataot.
Sorry, just explain what question is.
I think there were opinions that said that you could, if you did a koav and you did a tolda of the av, not of the koav, that you might be chayav two chataot and it was only if you did the koav and the av and the tolda of the av together that you would be chayav one.
Yes.
That would leave us potentially with, if you had two under one category and did the other 38 malachas, you could still have 40 chataot. So it doesn't seem, even if that we're limiting the number of chataot to 39, you could still be 40, 41, 42.
No, that is correct. If you are, so this is the Maram makes the following point. The Maram says that we shouldn't be medayik. The number 39 appears in two contexts. It appears in our Mishnah, which says the 39 malachas, and it appears in a series of droshas in which the Gemara is doresh in HaTorah that there are 39 malachas. The Maram, which I also printed in the source sheet, and if we have time, we will go through inside, says that if there is a drosha that teaches us the number 39, then we have a problem. Because why would the number 39 be halachically significant? Unless there's a limit on malachas on chatois of 39. Otherwise, there's no relevance to the number 39. All we would have to do is work out how many of us there are, and how many toldas there are, and how each tolda falls under its av category. So the number 39, if it's a drosha in the Torah, is a problem. However, the number 39 in the Mishnah, says the Maram, is not a problem, because the Mishnah may be saying something simple, which is if you did all 39 malachas in the simplest form, you would be chayiv 39 times maximum. The Mishnah isn't going into what happens if you do permutations, complex permutations of Avos and Toldos. So the number in the Mishnah, we again, in truth, the simplest reading of the Mishnah is that the Mishnah holds you're not chayiv in a Tolda b'makom av, period. But when the Gemara at the end says you need the minyan at the end to exclude being chayiv in a Tolda b'makom av, is because you could have been madche that when the Mishnah says you're chayiv, if you do all the malachas, you're chayiv 39, it meant what it said. If you do all the Avos malachas in the simplest form, you just do the Avos malachas, then you are chayiv 39. You're chayiv 39 times, and it didn't mean to say anything about what happens if you do told us. So in the Mishnah we can get away with that, and the Gemara in the droshas you obviously can't get away with it, because in droshas terms, if you have 39, then it's telling us something. It must be telling us you're only chayiv an upper limit of 39 malachas. So says the Maram and the Ritva. So again, just in terms of sources, this is what the Maram and the Ritva say. Does that answer your question, Martin? Or yeah, okay. Yeah, good. Okay. I would like to use the remaining time actually to move away from the maths and try and draw out what concepts we can from all of this, because the crunching of the data here is almost endless. So I just want to spend a little bit of time trying to understand what Tosfos means when Tosfos says that if we only had the we would have said that that's two toldas you are exempt from, but not an av and a tolda. And we saw in the Rambam that the Rambam also had lurking in the back of his head the same svara, in which he thought it was more pashut that you're exempt when you do two toldas than when you do an av and a tolda. Now, the broad direction of how to make sense of this is not that complicated. How exactly to work it all out is difficult, and I'm not sure I've got there, but let's just say the broad category. So I want to just start from the very basics. If anyone has been confused by by all the maths of everything we're saying, forget all the calculations. Just zooming in on one point, which is that Tosfos and the Rambam teach us that it is more obvious that if you do two toldas of the same Av, you're only chayiv once, than if you do an Av and a tolda and its tolda. You could have said that if you do an Av and its tolda, you're chayiv two, and if you do two co-toldas, you're only chayiv one. That's the crucial point that we're now focusing on. So the background to all of this is that we have a conceptual chiddush in Hilchos Shabbos. Normally with shogegos, a shogeg means a mistake. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how many shogegos did you make? With all the thunder and lightning around Hilchos Shogegos, ultimately the question you're asking yourself is, how many mistakes did you make? Now, a mistake isn't necessarily defined in simple sort of psychological terms. How many errors of judgment did I make? It's defined by fundamentally how many halachas did I get wrong, or how many things did I get wrong? And this is really the working basis of the Mishnah at the beginning of Kal Gadol, which says if I don't know Ikar Shabbos and I'm unaware of the whole of Shabbos, then there's one shogeg. If I'm aware of the concept of Shabbos, but I don't know today is Shabbos, then each Saturday that I don't realize is Shabbos is a shogeg. If I'm aware that today is Shabbos, but I don't know that these are melachos, then each melacha is the shogeg, and so on and so forth. So the core question we're trying to ask ourselves is, how many shogegs occurred? Now, normally speaking, the answer is relatively simple, which is if there's one lav, then that's one shogeg. I made a mistake about this lav. I wasn't aware of this lav. The chiddush of Hilchos Shabbos, and we learn it from a drasha, is that even though there's really only one lav, leisasako melacha, nonetheless, each of melacha is counted as its own shogeg. It's treated almost as if it's a separate lav, and it's its own halachic category with respect to shogegs. So it may not be its own halachic category with respect to other things, but with respect to shogegs, each av is its own halachic category. Now, there is something called an av and something called a tolda. Exactly what those phrases mean is not entirely clear. We've spent a lot of time learning it, and we haven't come out entirely clear. But what we have come out clear is that these are a separate shem and melacha, as a separate status, as a shem melacha. It's a separate tolda, is a separate shem melacha. It's not that somehow a tolda is derived from an av and is another example of an av or a fairly similar subcategory of the av. It's its own shem and melacha. It's its own status as a melacha. And we have a number of sources that taught us this, including the Yerushalmi that we saw, in which the Yerushalmi said that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish knew something was a tolda, and they knew it was a melacha, and then they worked out which category to fit it into, not that they derived it from Av. We saw Rabbi Ram ben Harambam, who says that you can't transfer dinim from an Av to a tolda. So just because an Av, like Dosh, is only by Gedolei Karka, doesn't mean it's tolda, which is Cholev, is only Mishum Gedolei Karka. So he asks his protagonist, the Chacham Laniel, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I never said, the Rambam never said, my father never said that Cholev is Dosh. He says it's a tolda of Dosh, and these are separate melachos with their own rules. There's a Gemara which I think I have a feeling that even though I've quoted many times, I've never actually shown you. Again, I'll try and put it on the WhatsApp group. A Gemara in Shabbos Daf Tzati Hey Amud Aleph, in which the Gemara discusses what is the melacha of Cholev. Cholev mishum mai mechayev. Why are you chayev for Cholev? Answer the Gemara, mishum Cholev, because the Cholev is its own melacha. Megavin mishum mai chayev. Why are you chayev for Megavin? Megavin is Cholev is milking. Megavin is cheese making. Mishum Megavin, because of Megavin, it's its own melacha. Etc., etc. So that phrase always rings on my ear. Cholev mishum cholev, megavin mishum megavin. So even though when you look at the Gemara, it's a Gemara that's sort of trying to work out how to, within which melachas to nestle cholev and megavin. And cholev, we've seen some of the Rishonim put it under Dosh, some of the Rishonim put it under the melachas. But there's also something there. Cholev mishum cholev. Never forget that cholev is its own melacha. Megavin is its own melacha. It's just a tolda. Nonetheless, these toldas have different names. A tolda is only a tolda, and an av is an av. And therefore, what Tosfos, the most raw, simple understanding of what Tosfos is saying over here is that if you have two toldas of one av, there's only one halachic category with which you're being a shogeg. You're being a shogeg in tolda de chorish, tolda de boina, whatever the tolda is. If it's an av and a tolda, then there's two halachic categories that you're making a mistake about. You're making a mistake about the av of boina and the tolda of boina. And therefore, the mere labeling of something as an av and a tolda itself makes it a halachically different sort of category with respect to Hilchos Shogegos. or at least that was the Havamina. It turns out not to be true because the Halacha we paskin that you're only chayav one for two Toldos, and in the same way, you're only chayav one for an Av and a Tolda. But the Havamina of Tosfos and the Rambam is that the mere fact that one is an Av and one is a Tolda makes it a different halachic type, and therefore that itself could have been the trigger for this being viewed as a different shogeg. So just to summarize what we're saying, we always need to ask ourselves in Hilchos Shogegas, what is the name of the error? What is the name of the Shogeg? Is it a separate Shogeg that's occurring? There's a chiddush in Hilchos Shabbos that this isn't one lav. This is 39 halachic categories of mistakes, 39 mistakes that you can make. La halacha, we paskin there are 39 and no more. They're the Toldos are all considered single shoggas with the others. But the Havamina was, no, each Tolda should be its own shogga. Before we knew Rabbi Lezer, who says Yochayv Tolda Makom Av, he holds that Yochayv and the full array of Toldas because Cholev Mishum Cholev, Megavim Mishum Megavim. It's its own shame Melacha. It's irrelevant that it's a Tolda or an Av. So that's the most extreme position, that every Tolda is its own shame Melacha. The opposite extreme is what we paskin, which is there's only 39 shemus of Melachos and Hilchos Shabbos, and therefore only 39 shoggas possible. But there was a middle position which Tosfos and the Rambam considered, in which there's a shame 39 shemus of Av Melachos, and then there's a shame Tolda Melacha, and therefore Tolda de Boina and Boina are two separate shemus, and therefore should be two separate shoggas. Whereas two different Toldas of Boina all share one shame of Tolda de Boina. In other words, this middle position doesn't go as extreme as Rabbi Lezer, that each Tolda has its own Shem and Melacha, but they think there's a generic Shem Melacha called Tolda de X. So there's X, Y, Z, etc. The 39 Shemas, A, B, C, D, and so on, the 39 Shemas and Melachas, and then there's a generic name. All the Toldas of Melacha A are known as Tolda de A. All the Toldas of Melacha B are known as Tolda de B, and so on and so forth. And therefore, that was the Havamin of Tosfos, that there is no, that there's, you're only chayav on, if you do an Av and a Tolda, you're chayav shtayim, because you did the Av of Boina and the Tolda de Boina. But if you do two Toldas of Boina, they both share one name, Tolda de Boina, Tolda de Boina, Tolda de Boina, and therefore it's just repeating the same Melacha several times. This is the Havamin of Tosfos, and I owe this analysis to a piece from the MS Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who has a very nice sefer on Hilchos Shabbos, and this is where he says it. It's one of these things, once you read, it's sort of obvious that this is. Did anyone come to this sort of maskana themselves in their own learning? Did anyone vaguely feel their way around this idea? I certainly didn't. I was really struggling with Tosfos and began searching through the Achronim.
So if you do a Tolda of Bishul and a Tolda of a Fia, the same analysis applies in Shogeg.
Excellent. Now the Rambam adds a very, very nice point, Edward, that the Rambam, now that we are hashta, once we are nochis, once we enter the possibility that there's something called Tolda de X and Tolda de Y, maybe there's only one generic name of Tolda. Maybe there's just name of Tolda, because the Rambam, in a remarkable addition, went further than so. So he says yearly. The Rambam said yearly. Sorry, also Tolda shall av zeh. The Tolda shall av zeh. Behelam achas. If you did the Tolda of av A and the Tolda of Rabbi, yearly you chayiv beis chatois. I think you are chayiv to chatois. Now yearly in a Rambam is always an exciting turn of phrase, because first it means the Rambam scanned the whole of Bavli and Yerushalmi and didn't think there was a clear-cut Gemara that said this, and didn't think there was a clear-cut raya from a Gemara that said this. And we're now seeing pristine reasoning of the Rambam, svara of the Rambam. So the Rambam very rarely says Yerali, and when the Rambam says Yerali, it's telling us that in the whole of Shas Bavli Yerushalmi, with the whole array and mastery of halachic sifras, the whole mastery of halachic literature the Rambam had, he didn't find a clear raya. Very, really, really interesting. And the Rambam thought there's no clear raya. If I do Tolda de Koitz and Tolda de Choresh, or you chayiv one or two chatos, it's quite amazing. Tolda de Choresh and Choresh, the Gemara. Choresh and Koitz, Gemara. Two Toldas of Choresh, Gemara. But what about Toldot Choresh and Toldot Koitz and I do together? So the Rambam, I found no raya, but yearly, it appears to me that you're chayiv beis chatos. That means to say the Rambam had a havamina that if you do two others, you're chayiv shtaim. That's an explicit Gemara. If you do two Toldos of two different others, you're only chayiv once. That means to say the Rambam had a havamina that there was a generic name of the Melacha was just Tolda, and therefore you wouldn't be chayiv on a if you do two Toldos together, you would only be chayav one chatos, because with Toldos there is no chiluk chatos. The whole concept of chiluk chatos is with Av and Tolda, or Av and Av, but with Tolda and Tolda, these aren't significant enough halachic categories to make a distinction. So I'll stop there for today. I will get back to Martin's point.
Can you just tell, where was that Rambam again?
Sorry?
What's the citation to that Rambam citation?
I printed it on the source sheet, source 6.
Source 6.
I think on the source sheet it's half the Rambam, but then I think I sent them the WhatsApp group the full Rambam. I'll post it again. Hilchos Shogeg Perek Zayin Halacha Hey. Have a look at the Rambam. They're very, very important Rambam. And next year I will get back to Martin's point and remind you of Martin. I can see you've been in Chazara. I'll remind you of Rabbeinu Chananel that we saw at the beginning of the Perek, in which the Rabbeinu Chananel talks about grandchildren on Melachos. Also told us. Does anyone remember this? Told us. So I'll share with you a beautiful piece from Rav Vosner. I don't normally quote this range of Achronim, but here I was completely flabbergasted. I was completely stuck. So I used my wonderful Otzah Chachma program and went on the search database to find out Achronim that spoke on the Sugya. And I'll share with you a very nice piece from analysis from Rav Vosner, in which he makes Martin a very, very similar point. You edged really, really close to a really important point. We'll look at how to deal with grandchildren of Melachos also in the thoughts of Rav Vosner. And then in Mitzvah Hashem, the next year we will read through the Maram together, just as I've been asked to read through some of the sources and learn them through, and then we'll finish. We'll move on from this sugya, and I hope either we'll do Bekiyas and help the Shogeg to people interested, or Muktzah. So we'll stop there for the day.
When you get a chance, and not
Sorry,
now,
Gary?
when you get a chance,
Yes.
Conceptually, what's the rationale that underlines these approaches, but not now?
The rationale for the underlying
that underlines these approaches.
Yeah, I will try and speak about this a little bit. Yes, yeah, I'll try and speak about it next week.
Thank you very much.